Superheroes are great and all, but they're only ever as good as the bad guys they face. And the MCU has some grade A bad guys waiting in the wings. What would a Batman be without the Joker? A Spider-Man without the Green Goblin? Thor without Loki? While we're at it, an entire Marvel Cinematic Universe without Loki. I don't even want to think about it. But Loki can't carry the bad guy water for the MCU all on his own. But that's alright because there's some great big bads waiting to be tagged in. In the Eternals, where A.I.M showed up to tell Cersei that he was not amused, the giant being showed up in the sky, no doubt causing plenty of panic attacks across an invasion-weary world. And probably at least one guy in a tank top going, what now? Let me guess, this one thinks Earth really is a marble or something. Which is still better than how the planet-eating Galactus sees Earth. There's a lot of reasons to think Marvel's hungriest hippo might be making his way to Earth. The Marvel superheroes have done a fair bit of mucking about in space lately, in ways that could put Earth on the menu. Having 2 Infinity Gauntlet snaps, Shang-Chi's ring sending mysterious signals, and A.I.M himself being upset that Tiamat just became a weird tourist destination. Not to mention that Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four, is finally on its way to the MCU. Hooray! This might bring back some scars, folks, but just because we were all kinds of wrong before, it doesn't mean that it's off the table. We're talking, of course, about the master of manipulation himself, Mephisto. But just like the MCU has spent time mucking about in space, Phase 4 also finds itself mucking about in multiple dimensions. Doctor Strange has already forced Dormammu to bargain. The stage is set for the one who's known for terrible bargains. Mephisto is unique in that he's not anyone's signature foe, but a foe to the entire universe. But he does have some favorites, and some of those are already here or coming. Wanda's children still aren't resolved, after all. The Skrulls are allies for now in the MCU, but they've had some serious Earth beef in the comics. That might be because in the second issue of Fantastic Four, Reed Richards hypnotized some Skrulls into thinking they were cows and never undid it. They lived their lives as cows, hooked up with bulls, and created Skrull cows. It's a whole thing. There was a lot more hypnotism in early Fantastic Four stories than you'd think. The Skrulls upped their game with Skrull Clerk, because vowels are for losers, who was enhanced to replicate all of the Fantastic Four's powers. It was super effective until Reed Richards found the off switch. For realsies. But the Skrulls aren't the type to give up on a plan just because of a setback, no. They figured out how to replicate powers as well as appearances, and perpetrated an invasion of Earth in secret. A secret invasion, if you will. A storyline that's making its way to Disney Plus real soon. Marguerite Hellbender hasn't been around the Marvel Universe a long time, but in the short time that she has, she's made a big impression, mostly by going big right off the bat. Hailing from parts unknown in the Milky Way galaxy, she has a penchant for collecting big hitters. Her attempts to grab Space Dragon Fin Fang Foom put her in opposition to a pair of Hulks, she and Totally Awesome Hulk Amadeus Cho. She-Hulk is on her way to Disney Plus, and back in October, rumors started circulating that World War Hulk could be in development, suggesting that maybe Big Green isn't as cool riding shotgun with Banner as we've been led to believe. Knull has already cast a long shadow in the MCU without ever actually showing up. He severed the head of the Celestial that became nowhere, and he used that head to craft All Black the Necro Sword, which looks suspiciously like Hela's weapon in Thor Ragnarok. And he inspired Gorr's god-butchering ways, including Gorr getting the Necro Sword himself. Gorr is of course set to be played by Christian Bale in Thor Love and Thunder. That's awesome. But his biggest creation just made a cameo in the MCU, if briefly. Knull's ultimate plan to get this populating of the universe under control was the symbiotes, eventually known as the Clintarians, the most famous being Venom. All that's left is for Knull himself to finally show up to take matters into his own hands. That dude is freaky! Never underestimate the power of a bad lab partner. Perhaps 2 of the greatest comic book villains of all time in one version or another have their origins in being a terrible lab partner. For Clark Kent, that's Lex Luthor. At least one version of him, continuities are hard. Reed Richards and Victor Von Doom's college rivalry has spiraled out of control. What started as a simple prank, changing Doom to Doof, has gotten out of hand. After a failed experiment and an armor upgrade, Doom has managed to put his science chocolate in Magic's peanut butter, and gone on to not just hate Reed Richards, but pretty much everyone. He's also a supervillain who is the leader of an entire country. Hey, if Wakanda can have a superhero king, Latveria can have a supervillain dictator. With the Fantastic Four on the horizon, Doom is inevitable. Can't wait. Victor Von Doom has already had 2 on-screen appearances, 3 if you've seen the Roger Corman bootleg, but he won't be that hard to reboot. There's another hero-specific villain that spread his hate wings to menace most of Marvel that might be harder to replace. William Dafoe's Norman Osborn was so remarkable they brought him back. and got rid of that helmet. Osborn has graduated from throwing pumpkin bombs at friendly neighborhood superheroes to running S.H.I.E.L.D. He even changed the name to Hammer, but don't tell anyone that's what the acronym stood for. So evil. With the potential for more Spider-Man movies and an expanding universe, there's room for an evil Tony Stark. Nightmare was another theory that turned out to be super not true for WandaVision. The Fear Lord and ruler of the nightmare realm of the dream dimension has made a sinister life out of trying to turn the universe into a waking nightmare in order to feed off all the fears of, well, everyone. There's still room for Nightmare in Phase 5 and beyond. His first foe, Doctor Strange, is breaking the multiverse because he didn't stop to explain how the spell worked to Peter. Figure it out, guys. Also, one of his Fear Lord cousins, though Nightmare doesn't consider him that, went and broke free in Shang-Chi, the Dweller in the Darkness. So the door is already open. There was one being of unimaginable horror that did have an indirect hand in WandaVision. The Darkhold, which hipped Wanda to her true role as Scarlet Witch, is a book of magic, written by a being known as Chthon. The Eternals showed that Earth was a busy place long ago, but before Celestials started mucking about with things, there were even older gods who eventually realized that if they absorbed one another, they'd gain even more power. One thing led to another, yada yada yada. The parents return and they decide that the god-level Pac-Man high score holder Chthon has to go. But he left behind the book hoping that someone would do silly with it and create an opportunity for him to come back. Something like trying to make imaginary kids real, perhaps, With all the disappointment at the Mandarin turning out to be an actor named Trevor, bloody hell. There was another classic Iron Man and everyone else foe that was wasted in Iron Man 3, Advanced Idea Mechanics, or A.I.M. Think of A.I.M like Acme from the Roadrunner cartoons. When you need a piece of horrifying tech to menace a meddling superhero, you turn to A.I.M. With Kildridge gone, there's more room for A.I.M leadership, the Scientist Supreme. If we can have a Sorcerer Supreme, we can have a Scientist Supreme, right? There have been a lot of people who've held that title, but the clear favorite is the mental organism designed only for killing, MODOK. While his Hulu series is waiting on a second season announcement, there are others who can step into the role and fill the vacuum left by the defeat of Hydra. There's been a big bad sitting in reserve since the very early days of the MCU, Samuel Stearns. In The Incredible Hulk, he was a scientist who was trying to help Bruce get rid of his angrier half, only to be forced to give an angrier half to Emil Blonsky, the Abomination. Last we saw Stern, he was getting some gamma goo in an open wound. Gross. Unlike Abomination, Hulk and She-Hulk, instead of bulking him up, the gamma radiation turned Stern into a big old brain. Literally. With Abomination back in the fold and Jennifer Walters about to get an angrier half of her own, the table's set to see Stern's brainier side. Before there was an MCU, there was a shared mutant verse of the Fox X-Men movies. That counts for 7 X-Men movies, 3 Wolverine movies, and even a New Mutants movie. It might be hard to find a fresh X-Men story for the franchise as they make their way to the MCU. But then there's Mojo and the Mojoverse. He's a being of unimaginable horror that pacifies his dimension by constantly broadcasting brutal and bizarre reality shows. A definite departure from the last franchise, and timely too. When you enjoy what you do, they say you never work a day in your life. Arcade likes killing people, but he's gotten bored just assassinating, so he went to making elaborate funhouse traps for his victims. Think of it as somewhere between the Joker and Jigsaw from Saw, but looking like Richie Cunningham going to prom. With the MCU filling up with heroes, someone's bound to call in help with dealing with them. Might as well go to the most colorful, right? Phase 4 has seen a lot of mucking about with reality. Wanda created a new one out of grief. Doctor Strange broke the barriers trying to put Spider-Man's secret identity back in the bottle. Sophie killed the only one keeping the multiverse from getting off the rails. Strange Supreme appears to be making things get out of hand for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Like Strange tells Peter, the multiverse is something they know frighteningly little. Sooner or later, that pinprick's gonna happen, and the being of nearly unlimited power and a man-perm will show up, the Beyonder. The best part is the Beyonder's big move is to grab the universe's heroes and villains and put them in a planet-sized mayo jar and make them fight. Secret Wars, anyone? Yes, please. Of course, we've already seen the next big bad, with the only question left being how big will his bad get. Kang the Conqueror has a lot of evil fingers in the future MCU pies. Jonathan Majors was announced for Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania before he turned out to be the monster at the end of the book in the Loki series. He's also notoriously not fond of the Fantastic Four, specifically Reed Richards, who might be the time traveler's great to the 10th power grandpa. Bonus points, he's also the catalyst for the Young Avengers when trying to impress his teenage self with his evil deeds went all kinds of wrong. And his teenage self became Iron Lad and formed the Young Avengers to stop his future self. Woo! Time travel, am I right? Kang has a lot of menacing left to do in the MCU.
This is wild.
Okay, I know it all.
If we get a new Spider-Man trilogy, I want to see the Walrus. He has the proportional strength of a walrus. So, less, because he's smaller. Look him up, it's totally real.